time suggested that al-Qaeda as an entity has been weakened, fundamental questions about the nature of our engagement in Pakistan as well as in Afghanistan are being raised in ways that hadn't been raised until this point.
But wasn't it expected?
To be honest, I think it was expected early, but as the years dragged on...
But the joke was that is why they wanted to keep Osama bin Laden alive, to keep the relationship alive.
That was a joke, and now maybe the joke is on us.
So basically...
But we're forced to confront this. And as a practical question, I honestly believe that few Americans contemplated just how significant that might be to our strategy in the region. And I would say it comes in a context, right? Yes, there have been a series of crises all along the way. But with the Raymond Davis issue, with preceding frustrations and acrimonious relationship over the drone strikes, we are finding ourselves in what was already a very difficult
Raymond Davis affair should have been frustrating for Pakistanis. You had CIA armed contractors, which are not bound by the U.S. law, which we all know were not restricted by Congress. Yes. And they were there on Pakistani streets, and there was a double murder. There was a third killing. The U.S. Embassy and the consulate has never even provided that vehicle. I'm talking of the third vehicle, not of the Raymond Davis. The vehicle in which 2 Americans or 3 Americans actually killed a pedestrian who had nothing to do with the whole Raymond Davis affair. The U.S. consulate to this day has never provided the names of those people. They have whisked away. I mean, where else in the whole world, United States, will do like this?
Well, yes. Look, there have been other instances, but let's be careful. Yeah. I think the reality is, yes, Pakistan is frustrated, but the way that the crisis was handled and the way that it spun into a diplomatic crisis that went well beyond the nature of an incident between an individual connected with the U.S. government, that took on a significance in terms of U.S. perception of Pakistan's motivations that became profoundly frustrating back in Washington as well. So it became a mutual frustration.
I think the frustration in Washington or in the United States, Daniel, was, I think it was manufactured. I mean, immediately after the incident, it was clear a couple of local television affiliates immediately knew that this guy was CIA. The Washington Post, the New York Times, and other outfits were explicitly asked to suppress that information for a period of time. Meanwhile, in Pakistan, you know, while there's a loud and vociferous nationalistic, overly patriotic segment within the media, there's also people, including people employed by state television, who were asking very difficult questions of the Pakistani state, of the Pakistani government, the Pakistani military. So I think that, you know, the problem of Pakistan's perception in the United States and the consequential problems that causes bilaterally, that at least partially has to be the responsibility of the U.S. I mean, nobody asked President Obama to openly declare this man to be our diplomat. And, I mean, that was an explicit, either he was lied to, and therefore he was made to look bad, or he lied himself. You know, when the Pakistanis lie, it's plastered on the front pages of, you know, every website in the world. When President Obama lies or misinforms the American people, he gets a pass. I think that sense of sort of an imbalance in terms of how lies and truth are treated in both countries, I think there's a great sensitivity to that difference, the differential between those two.
Just let Saqib be part of it. Saqib, do you feel frustrated by the fact that the U.S. and Pakistani narratives are just wide apart from each other? The U.S. has just one narrative from the whole thing. Pakistan has a total different narrative. For instance, no one in the U.S. is asking the question, why kill Osama bin Laden? I mean, Osama bin Laden was an international public enemy, was an enemy to the whole world. Why not expose him? Why not investigate him? I mean, if 40,000 people have died in this country, 35,000 civilians, 5,000 security personnel, U.S. has one narrative, Pakistan has a different narrative. No one is asking this question. They're asking different questions. We are asking different questions, right? Do you feel frustrated by that?
I think, yes, there's a deeper frustration. I think the fact that, you know, after 60 years of engagement, even though it may have been episodic, you know, and not really deep-rooted in many senses as we see now, the fact that we've not been able to communicate our sensitivities to the U.S. I mean, you know, I mean, the scholars who understand, think tanks in the U.S., marginally. But, you know, the response of the Pakistanis to this episode of, you know, Osama bin Laden being killed, I think really typifies the deep gulf between us and the U.S. in a sense. I mean, here's U.S. celebrating the death of the world's most wanted terrorist, and here's Pakistan. You know, I mean, first it says congratulations, but then it says, you know, by the way,
in the dock.
yeah, but fine. But then it starts complaining about, you know, I mean, being invaded or whatever. I mean, the fact is that we've not been able to communicate our sensitivities, that these are red lines for us. We don't want somebody else to take a cue from here, and we don't want this replicated to our, you know, this is a Pakistani narrative, security establishment narrative, which is we don't want this replicated to our strategic assets. Now, these concerns, I think, have not really registered with the U.S.
Okay, go ahead. You want to say something?
I would only suggest that Pakistan has communicated some of its red lines. That's quite clear with respect to the areas of Pakistan where drones have been used. I think that's been digested by the American security establishment. But Pakistan, in the case of bin Laden,
like you mean the Pakistani they have, as far as we understand, I think whether it's accepted publicly or not, that the drones had always an approval from the Pakistani side. Well, the Pakistani
let's just
side
say that
hasn't
outside
really.
of government it looks that way.
If the drones have been taking off from Pakistani soil, I mean, maybe not in the last few months, but from the very beginning.
Sure.
If they have been taking up like bases from inside Pakistan, so then obviously the Pakistani protests have no real value.
But
well,
that's kind of the problem. I mean, there's some things that I think we can complain to the Americans about. And there's some things that I think...
So we're not complaining about the drones. That's why I have never complained about the drones.
There's some
because
things
I know
that we
the
have
reality.
to actually ask internally. For example, I think that, you know, this gulf between communicating our sensitivities, I think there's a duplicity there that's exercised by the military and the political governments in Pakistan, regardless of whether it's under Musharraf.
But what about the invasion? What about the invasion?
But this is the point. No,
well,
this is the point, that to the extent that Pakistan has red lines, the United States also has red lines. The prospect that its enemy number one over the course of a decade is residing inside of Pakistan, from an American perspective, it looks like a legitimate use of force that does not overstep its
Is there a legal
obligations,
instrument? Is there a
to
legal
Pakistan.
instrument in international law to basically define this legitimate use?
Well, I believe the United States has recognized that he is a legitimate target because he has declared war against the United States, and that's, the legitimacy argument.
This is a new thing in history. I mean, United States decided itself.
When Osama bin
This is an
Laden
armed intervention. It's a violation of the United Nations.
States.
Why not to do a joint operation? Just to finish off this argument.
I would suggest that the future that the United States would have liked to see by 2011 with Pakistan would have very much been one in which the level of our cooperation with the Pakistani military and intelligence was such that we could conduct a joint operation. I think it is quite revealing that at this stage the decision was made not to. It suggests that underlying lack of trust that extends, I dare say, both directions. And so this is a revealing moment, but not necessarily revealing in a good way about where the relationship stands.
But this is where
But this is the truth. This is the reality.
But this is where people like me become very unpopular, both in Islamabad and in Washington, D.C. I've repeatedly and regularly mocked the notion of strategic dialogue between a vendor and a purchaser, between sort of a contractual, a series of transactions rather than a relationship. Yet, you know, for the last decade or so, in different ways and shapes and forms, there's been an insistence by the security and the policy establishment in both countries to pretend that this is anything more than a series of transactions. I mean, it continues to be that. And I think as we go forward, it's going to become even more difficult to deepen this and to make it into a relationship.
But we also have to address what Daniel says, that there has been such level of mistrust that after 10, 11 years of this relationship, if they had to take a unilateral action, that actually meant that there was no trust. They didn't trust them.
Fine, but you know, my point is, okay, I can just speak from the economic side of things. What doesn't make sense to me is that why should 10 years down the road Pakistan have a level of frustration about US's economic engagement with Pakistan? You know, it's been transactional, it's not been transformational, there's been lots of words, and for the first time, I think 2008 onwards, there's been smoke and mirrors accounting. You know, I mean, the level of assistance to Pakistan has been inflated. It's been talked about. You know, I mean, I can give you an instance when when the Tokyo pledges came around in early 2009, the U.S. said, okay, we'll add about $3-4 billion, in terms of pledges. We discovered much later that this wasn't new assistance; it was repledges of existing bilateral aid. Fine. Along came the floods. We discovered that we were given an idea that the U.S. would be committing an X amount, and we discovered that X amount was being diverted once again from existing pledges. The same with the Kerry Lugar money. So basically, one window or one bucket, is being made to wear 4 to 5 different hats. And then, of course, the whole issue, as we were discussing when we walked to the studio, is conflating reimbursement.
You mean $21 billion?
Yeah, $21 billion. Out of that, $9 billion is reimbursements, contractual reimbursements for services Pakistan has rendered. So, that's not assistance. In fact, the footnote...
Is the total figure $20 billion?
20.7.
20.7, but mind you, this includes loans as well as grants. The loan component may be small. It includes assistance in kind. So, it's not money that's flown into Pakistan. It's U.S. helicopters flying or, for flood assistance or whatever. All that is part of this. The large bulk of this is not economic assistance.
But I think
they have released the money.
The
if the U.S. helicopters are flying, then they have released the money from somewhere.
Fine.
No, but there's a bigger distinction, I think, Moeed and Saqib, which is that, of the $20.7 billion that the U.S. has provided since 2001, or essentially fiscal year 2002.
But has it really provided $21 billion?
It hasn't. I mean, this idea that the American people have gifted this money to the Pakistani people is fundamentally flawed. And the reason it's flawed is because out of that money, $14 billion, so almost 75% of that of those funds, maybe not quite 70% of those, have been provided to the Pakistani military. This is not people.
Which is coalition support.
No, beyond that as well.
It's military hardware, it's coalition support funds, it's reimbursements for services performed. So I think that it's very important to remember that more than 14 billion of the 20 billion has been for the military. That's what I mean when I say that it's a series of transactions. That the Pakistani military offers
is this only a mercenary
services.
Relationship then? Was it always a mercenary relationship?
Well, I
that
think
we have to fight your war, and you have to pay us for that. And that is why people are angry that they say that we have given so much money and Osama bin Laden was not caught.
I would suggest that this was the impulse behind the move by the Obama administration to undertake the Kerry Lugar Berman money and the refocus towards civilian assistance programming. This tripling of non-military assistance. And the transactional quality of the relationship was remarked upon by many back in Washington as being fundamentally unhealthy for promoting the kind of transformation in the relationship that we would have liked to see. Unfortunately, the implementation of Kerry Lugar Berman has lagged behind where I think any of the promoters of the relationship would have liked to see. Both in terms of the actual flow of resources and the perception among Pakistanis that it's accomplishing what it was intended to accomplish. So the timeline has been about 18 months to 2 years of that money, and that hasn't been successful.
Many people like myself had taken the position that Kerry Lugar bill, we should have rejected the Kerry Lugar bill, because our fear was this, that Kerry Lugar bill, though it says to be a civilian help or civilian aid pipeline, is actually contingent upon Pakistan's military cooperation. So it's another kind of tool. And this is precisely what has happened now when the intelligence is coming under shadows, or the intelligence is there's accusations against the intelligence. People in the Senate and Congress are saying that the